Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Master Coaches Wednesday Weekly Buzz. I'm Bob Bertucci, joined by fellow Master Coaches Fran Flory, Mick Haley, and Bill Walton. Today we have another special treat for all our viewers and listeners. Our topic today is going to be Olympic qualifications and Collegiate Division I performance and more. We have two incredible guests for this week's show. Mr. Doug Beal, the father of modern volleyball in the U.S.
Oh, good.
And Tom Hilbert, the retired head coach at Colorado State University and the winningest coach in that university's history, if I've done my research correctly. Tom, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, that's pretty good. Well, I'm going to get started first with a question for both you guys, but I'm going to start with Doug. Doug, you've had experience, in a different qualifying process for the Olympics than what the team has just gone through. And of course, we know that the women's team has just qualified for the Olympics in this last qualifier. Can you speak to the process and the advantage of early qualification?
Sure. First, thanks for the introduction. I'm not sure the father of volleyball is a good one. Age it anyway. It's nice to be here. I really enjoy the show you guys do. It's a pleasure to contribute to it. So Olympic qualification. First, I think it's a terrific achievement for the women's team to qualify, and I think, and Mick could probably speak to this literally as well as I can, but early qualification is enormous, and I think for so many reasons. Knowing that you're going to participate in the games, having essentially the full year or season to prepare for the games rather than specifically preparing for another qualification opportunity is a huge advantage. And so for all of the 6 teams plus the host, they are in a significantly more comfortable position from now to the time of Paris, and I'm sure Karch and his staff, and in many respects the players are relieved. There's a burden off their shoulders. They have the flexibility and the freedom now to look at different players, to rest players that might ordinarily not get an opportunity to rest. To look at the upcoming professional season as well as the beginning of the international season in 2024 in a completely different way. And so it's, I don't know, the term significant or important is probably soft sells how valuable early qualification is. And so it's wonderful for Karch, it's wonderful for the team, and it's just an enormous advantage. And really the only major event that's going to happen between now and the Paris Games is the Volleyball Nations League, the VNL. And so going into that event for our team and all the qualified teams gives them just this added opportunity to view the competition in a much different way. And essentially their performance will have on their own team no direct impact on qualification. But it does, I think, significantly bring up the issue of potentially some manipulation or some match manipulation that could affect the qualifying of those last 5 teams that will fill out the Olympic roster of teams. So maybe stop there and see if we go in another direction.
Well, I think that's something that we will want to touch on again, Doug, and I'd like you to go into that a little bit more. But how will Koch handle his roster during the VNL, this next summer, knowing that his team's already qualified?
Yeah, I can't know exactly the answer, but he has the opportunity to look at players that he might not ordinarily have an opportunity to look at or give them experience. And I think one of the things Karch does extraordinarily well, among quite a large number of things that I think he does well, is probably play more of his roster, whatever roster he happens to have for a particular tournament, than almost any of the teams that he's competing with in the sort of the medal potential category. I think he's extraordinarily good at that. And I think he's been able to do that over the last, a long number of years, a lot of years, really successfully. And so I think he's developed a larger potential pool of players who could be significant to the team's success than almost any of the other teams. And I think he just has more of a chance to do that because he knows he's qualified. And I think the other huge opportunity is coming out of the professional season, each year's a little bit different in terms of the overuse of some players or small injuries or the opportunity or lack of opportunity to give some players a rest and recovery. And so, he really doesn't have to play anybody that might need some time off or might need a little bit of a break. And one of the notes I made in preparing for this chat here is the volume of play is I think an increasingly big issue for all the national teams, and how you manage that volume and how you decide which players need to play more, need to play less. Is significant, I think, in the ultimate result that you get for your team. And so I think Karch and his staff have a wonderful opportunity now to make that decision without worrying that you have to be at your best and maybe push some players to play who aren't 100% or are shouldn't play any more than they want. So that it's just huge. It's really a huge advantage. And there's a little risk there, I guess, but I think the advantage so outweighs the risk that it's just something that I'm sure Karch is really pleased to be in this position with.
Well, Mick, you've also coached an Olympic team for the U.S. Do you have any other thoughts?
Well, it's not other thoughts, but I would concur. We were so fortunate to qualify in the first qualifying effort that we had. And between that time and the time we went to the Olympics, we had extremely large development in quality of play by Logan Tom, Kerry Walsh, Heather Bowen, and Robin Amo. Those four athletes in particular, around Danny Scott and Tara Battle Cross, really came into their own, and we were able to play some other players like Sarah Noriega. We had kind of the same situation that Karch has right now, two right sides that could really deliver, and we were able to do that. And we found out that we didn't play well against certain teams, and so we either got around them somehow or got better so that we could take them on and hopefully beat them. I was going to ask Tom Hilbert, he's been at Colorado State a long time, but he's also been overseas, and he's watched the quality of the international play as well as our players. And speaking of players, are there players that stand out to you, Tom, this coming Olympics you think have to perform for us to do well?
Well, yeah, Jordan Thompson, I think is her name, the kid from Cincinnati. I would think that she would really need to be healthy and come on and perform well from what I've seen. And, you know, Annie Drews has obviously done a nice job, but we took our team on a foreign tour last summer and had the fortunate, the schedule worked for us to watch the Champions League final. And the two opposites in that were unbelievable players. And one of them was, I think she's an Italian named Paola Uganu. And I mean, a player like that changes the entire definition of what you want to do offensively. And I think Jordan, to me, seems to be that kind of player for the United States, if I'm not mistaken.
So, Doug, we got Tom's view on the women, but John is just going into qualifications, right? John Spraw, our men's coach.
Right.
Have they started, or are they into this right now?
I think they start in a couple of days. So they're in Japan prepping right now. Yeah.
So what's your thought about his situation? Is his pool tougher than our women's pool? Is it similar? And what are our chances of getting qualified with the men?
Yeah, without putting a lot of pressure, there's already significant expectations, I think, on both of our teams, which in a way is wonderful. I think we've gotten used to teams being really good and being medal contenders, and so yeah, that's I think that's a nice situation for our country to be in, and both teams. I think John has a great chance to qualify. I think they're a world-class team. I think they are better than they were a year ago for a couple of reasons, significant reasons, I think. All the three qualifying tournaments are challenging. They're physically demanding events, which is a big difference in this cycle of qualifying than previously. I think playing against Japan is one of the hard things in our sport. I think that team happens to be one that Poland might be another one that comes to mind that plays a level above where they might ordinarily play when they're at home. I think Japan, Serbia are the most obvious teams that they need to play well against and beat, and probably one at least to qualify. But I think John has a nice team. I think Max Holt is playing better after a season off than he did before that in a lot of areas, and might give the U.S. a dominating middle that we haven't always had. I think I've been really impressed with the way Max has played this season at the VNL. So I think that year off was great for him. And maybe the most significant improvement in John's team is that I think he has a group of outside hitters that is stronger collectively than maybe we've had in my recollection of the men's team. DeFalco, I think, Russell, Jeske, Muagatatia, they are just a really strong position for the U.S. And I keep saying over and over, I think that's the most significant position. I know we talk a lot about the opposite player in the game right now, but I think collectively, the two outsides on your floor, if they outperform the two outsides for the other team, you likely win. And having the flexibility of that group is just different than we've had in the past because of injuries and growth and inexperience. And so that's a huge plus. And honestly, all four of those players have played at really high levels. Some, maybe a little more than others, but that's that's a huge strength for this team. And they're experienced. I think Micah Christensen is a world-class setter, and we don't give anything away in that position. I think Eric is a world-class libero, and we don't give anything away there. So I like this team a lot, and I think they're going to play really well. And the game is a challenging, close game, but I'm really optimistic, like I am on the women's side. I think we've got two teams that are going to qualify and are medal contending teams going into Paris.
So, Tom, have you had a chance to see the men at all?
We have Finland. I'm sorry, Mick. We have Finland and Egypt, Slovenia and Turkey and Tunisia also in that pool. Any of those teams pose a real threat to our men's team?
I'm not sure that I would pick out any one of them. The men's game is a fairly deep game, Bob, I think, and as Tom alluded to on the women's side, the same thing can happen on the men's side. The rally score game is pretty short, especially set by set. You just see lots of examples because of the serving particularly, but also because of the play of one particular outside hitter or opposite. I think if we were to play those teams 3 or 4 times, we're going to probably win 3 or 4 times, but there could be an upset. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't expect it to happen, but upsets happen more often in the rally score game than they do in the old side out game. But I think Japan and Serbia are the two teams that John is most focused on. We've all done lots of coaching, and you never want to overlook anybody, and you want to have your team prepared to play. And I don't know that the schedule that John has is the schedule that he would love to have, where the potentially most challenging matches are right at the end of his schedule. I think sometimes I didn't like that. I think it forces your team or gives them the opportunity to overlook somebody because you're sort of anticipating playing Serbia or Japan later in the tournament, and I'm not crazy about that. I'd like to have a mix, but it is what it is, and lots of the tournaments get set up for the supposed important matchups late. But I think John's team has been playing really well. They had a really good VNL. They could easily have won that tournament, and I think they're just in a nice spot, and minus any last minute quirky injuries or who knows about that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I expect that they're going to qualify. So,
All right, Mick, you have a follow up?
No, I'm going somewhere with this, so if you stick with me, Tom, have you seen the men's team, and do you have any additional thoughts about where they're at?
I haven't seen the men's team in probably a year, so I kind of would take the 5th on this one.
Okay. All right. So let me throw this at you guys, because this has all been well and good, but there's some concern. There's some concern about 2028. I know 24 is right around the corner, but we got to be thinking about 28 also. It's in the United States. It's in LA. That's a time where we have to be as good as we can be. One, think about this. Tom just retired. He retired from Colorado State with a darn good team, but he was able to say, I'm done, and walk away. We've got Karch that's been an assistant for 1 quadrennial, a head coach for 2 quadrennials. If he were to go another quadrennial to 28, that would be 3 quadrennials or 20 years coaching our national team in one form or another. John Sprague not only has done our national team for 2 quadrennials, but he's coached UCLA in addition and been a big mover in men's volleyball with the founder, one of the 2 founders of First Point Volleyball. These guys are carrying a heck of a load for the United States. Is there a chance that we won't have these 2 coaches for 28? Is this too hard to ask them to stay to 28? Or do you think we have plenty of coaches out here that can take the spots and carry us through 28? Because I feel volleyball in this country even goes to another pinnacle spot if we can win in 28. And Doug, you went through this in 84 when the championships were in Los Angeles and the Olympics were, and we got first and second. So I'll let you comment first, and then Tom, I'll let you jump in there also.
Lots of thoughts on that one. So the LA Games is a great opportunity in many respects, and not just for volleyball, but lots of sports. But volleyball is going to be absolutely a feature sport in Los Angeles. Hopefully we can play in Los Angeles at events leading up to the games that enhance the growth of the sport. There's lots of wonderful things happening in our sport. I think we've talked about that on this show before and probably lots of other times. The pro leagues and, the amazing things that are going on in the collegiate world. And so I think we all should be really excited and energized by the growth of the sport. And Los Angeles is likely to be a spectacular Olympics, and I think they're delighted that Paris is dealing with the issues going on with the sad state of affairs in Ukraine and with Russia, rather than LA in 24, and that LA gets 28, and hopefully those things are resolved and the Olympics is free of at least that kind of acute political infighting. I think both Karch and John love what they're doing, and I guess that's for me the bottom line. I think they really, really love their jobs, and I don't see any lessening of that. And I think, who knows? You can never predict what happens in life, but I'm not going to be at all surprised if they go to Paris and we either win or are competitive for medals, and we have 2 teams that play really well, and they continue through 28. So I don't know any reason that they wouldn't. Personal situations change all the time, and it's hard to predict that. I think they both do a really, really good job. Do we have other people? Absolutely. I think the coaching world in this country is exceptional, frankly, and I say that I don't know, because sometimes we love to be critical and point out everybody's failures, but en masse, I don't think there's another country that has the quality of coaching that exists in the United States. I think the investment and growth in the collegiate world is certainly more on the women's side, but is also happening on the men's side, only enhances the quality of coaching and the growth of the coaching community. And so, I'm not worried about that, honestly. I think I'm a big fan of continuity. I think that's one of the things that has kept the United States near the top of the world, or at the top of the world, with both teams. So I will not be at all surprised if John and Karch coach in LA in 28.
Tom, do you want to contribute to that?
I'll weigh in on that. And I don't, I haven't interacted with John near as much as I have with Karch, but I agree with Doug in that Karch really loves what he's doing, and he's doing it for the right reasons. And the only comment I'd have on this is that USA Volleyball really needs to make sure they create an environment where they don't burn these guys out. And they also need to create an environment where they are constantly mentoring and bringing up new coaches, just in case something happens or, one of them decides they're not going to do it. They need to have a good stable or cadre of people ready to go who understand, what the important parts of that job is. And I think, obviously roster management and keeping players excited and wanting to be part of the program, I think is something that Karch has done a great job of. And, I would say that needs to be a priority.
So do you have any fear, though, and Doug's painted such a great picture of our programs and what we can do. Do you have any fear that we're going to have trouble here in the women's programs with scoring? I mean, Jordan Larson seems to be carrying our team as the one reliable passing and hitting source. We've talked about Jordan Thompson on the right side and Annie filling in when she's not at her best, but where's the next talent coming from? Or do we have enough talent over the next 5 years to go into this Olympics and play for the gold and then maybe have a switch of quite a few players and be back in 28 and have a chance to win?
I feel like in middle attacking and in opposite, we look good. I think, obviously both of our outside hitters were great passing outside hitters, but those players eventually reach, for lack of a better term, an expiration date. And passing outside hitters are the thing that we need the most in this country, really physical kids who can serve receive. And to me, it seems like that is an area that we really do need to get better at in this country in developing.
And Doug, what would you say about the men's team? You painted a glorious picture of having 4 left sides with cannon arms, but how much can Matt Anderson carry us on the right side? I mean, he has been around, seems like forever, and our go-to. He probably isn't going to be the go-to in 28. So where are we there, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think what Tom said is very, very accurate. So we have, as everybody knows, we have this enormous population of really remarkable athletes on the women's side and a much smaller pool on the men's side. I think not to belittle this issue, but Karch has the freedom and flexibility and benefit of looking at a lot more players who have international talent than John does. And so, if John loses an Aaron Russell, that's a big deal. And so that's always going to be an issue. If Matt Anderson, wears down or tires out and is much less effective, that's a big deal. And so managing that group that, is getting a little bit older as international athletes, leading into Paris, I think is a challenge, is a tougher job for John, I think, than Karch. I think we're always going to be looking on the men's side a little more than on the women's side, and I'll come back to sort of my overall view of the women's world here in a second. That's tougher for John, and I've had a couple of conversations with him. I thought, and maybe I said this the last time I was on the show, I thought the men's NCAA tournament last year had the deepest group of potential successful international players that I'd seen in, 5 or 6 years. Physical kids, good arms that, were serving at a level that used to be a really big difference, I think, in the men's game between college and internationally. So I'm a little more encouraged than I might be. Do we have a great replacement right now for Matt? Maybe not. But both teams play a little bit different style than some of the rest of the world in that we have rarely depended on a single player at the level that some of the other teams do, men and women. So I think that's good. I think that's sort of the U.S. style in some respects. It's not the easiest one to define, but I think it exists. I think on the women's side, Karch is trying to build this outside hitter cadre, and I'm really impressed with Jordan Larson's level after essentially taking a year and a half off from the national team. She was as, I think, good an outside hitter in the Olympic qualifier as she was in Paris, or in Tokyo, maybe better. And there could be real value in managing a year off and getting players back and giving them this break of a physical break, a mental break, because gosh, they play a lot of volleyball, and it wears and tears on your body, and we all age at different rates, etc. So I like that. We haven't found, and I'm not even sure we're still looking for it on the women's side, this physically dominating player. Jordan Thompson is maybe the closest to this Aganyu or the Zhu from China, who's injured, by the way, and probably not playing much. And so I don't know. I like the way we play. I like the way our teams play, where we don't necessarily depend on this player that's going to get 60 swings a match and hope they get 35 kills and every critical ball goes their direction. So I don't know. I hear myself rambling here a little bit, but I like the way our teams play. I like the fact that they depend on being good volleyball teams and being strong in lots of the areas of the game. And here's Karch with the two setters from Tokyo who were both out and couldn't play at the qualifier. A relatively young middle who played the whole qualifier, Retke. He's got some pieces that he's really been good at using, and it impresses the hell out of me, frankly.
Well, don't wear yourself out because Bill's coming. He's got questions.
Okay. I thought his mic was off for a while.
The last, some college questions is, and you touched on it briefly, next year's VNL 2024, 3 weeks. They've increased the weighting for that tournament so that for the 5 teams, the 5 highest ranked teams that can get into the Olympics based on their ranking, 6 of the teams that'll be in the VNL are already qualified. What kind of potential, and if you could explain to people what this means, potential manipulation of teams potentially playing, 6, 17-year-olds, because by losing to one team, they can increase their rank, and then beating somebody else, they can decrease their rank.
For me, right, Bill? Or maybe, yeah. I think it's a terrible system. So to be blunt about it, I think the ranking system that the FIVB's put together is hard for me to decipher, and I'm a little bit of an insider, I guess. So I don't know how people figure it all out. I like the fact that we're not going through another round of qualifiers, especially 4-team qualifiers that was used leading up to Tokyo. I think 4-team qualifiers are crazy events. But I think the potential for, I don't know, event manipulation, match manipulation is significant. And I think that's unfortunate. And we shouldn't, we want to try to eliminate that as much as we can. And I saw teams moving up and down in the rankings with simply the results of a single match 2 or 3 places. And that, I don't know, is odd to me, I guess. I'm not crazy about that. So, to me, with just generally in sports, so this is an off the wall comment, but I think match manipulation is a serious issue right now in sports because of all the money and because of the betting and gaming, et cetera. So that's a problem. And to use the world ranking for the last 5 teams is, I'm glad the United States is not having to worry about that, and hopefully it won't have to worry about it on the men's side too. Is there a perfect qualification system? I doubt it, but this one isn't my favorite. I think the other surprising thing is that you have to have one team from each of the 5 continental confederations. So there's no African team qualified yet. That's pretty normal, but there's no Asian team qualified. And I think it's quite likely that China and Japan are going to qualify, or at least you would bet on that right now. But I don't know. It's kind of a crapshoot with the ranking and the preliminary rounds of the VNL. Everybody doesn't play everybody. That's an impossibility. So it's again, there's no perfect system, but I'm not so crazy about this one. And so I don't know if that's answering your question, but it could be there could be some squirrely results, and people are going to be screaming and yelling. And you've got a new deal in the NBA where you can't sit out your top players, and I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of discussion about that at the VNL in 2024. Why is this roster missing players that are going to be there, and why is this roster not? And I played this player in the first week, but not the second week, and all that. I think we're going to have plenty of pundits that are going to point those things out. So.
Yeah, and speaking about squirrely results and different things happening in volleyball, I mean, look at the college game. It's all over the place. And Tom, I'd like you to comment about, there's some different things happening in leagues and conferences, kind of a realignment of conferences beyond just people changing conferences. The rank order of conferences in this country is very different this year. What are your thoughts about those areas, and who's the up and comer and who's kind of losing some steam here?
Well, I think, first of all, I love seeing this because I really feel like there's a lot more parity across the country now, which is something that we needed in our sport. To me, it got kind of boring when it was the Pac-12 and the Big Ten always dominating the Final Four. Last year, we had a non-Power 5 team in there and 2 teams from the ACC. I mean, and I think you're starting to see, especially the top coaches and top programs really know how to assemble a championship level team. And, but what's interesting to me is you're seeing some fall off, especially in the Big Ten. Obviously Wisconsin and Nebraska are both really good, and I think both are national championship contenders. After that, it gets, it's hard to predict. You've seen people take losses that you just shouldn't take losses. And and then you've seen teams like Ohio State, who last year was really good, are now, under 500. So that's very, very interesting. And then, the SEC is another conference that has had some really strong teams, and I think they still do. I think Florida is emerging as they're a Final Four contender for sure. But Kentucky, who was the preseason voted number 1 in that, is now under 500. Kind of a disappointing start. And then 2 teams in that league, and Fran, I know you're familiar with this league, Tennessee and Arkansas, who were voted in the bottom half, are having exceptional starts to the year. And I think both of those teams are NCAA tournament contenders and have a chance to go pretty deep. And the Pac-12, you've got Stanford obviously is really good, but the next best team in that league right now is Washington State. And they are really showing that they are special and that they have a really strong, experienced team coming back. And so, and then after that, it probably goes Oregon, but it's hard. There's a lot of different people can beat each other there too. So I like the fact that there's a lot of parity. The Big 12 has got a lot of strong teams, especially because BYU is now playing in that league, and Texas and Baylor's good. I think I saw something where they're predicted to have over 6 teams in the NCAA tournament. That may be a stretch, but you never know. And I think there's a lot of volleyball to be played, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, here's a question. Like there's some great players that have transferred from good conferences and impacted different conferences, right?
Yes.
Are those players getting chased out, or are the coaches going and grabbing them? Texas won the national championship with a ton of transfers, right?
Well,
how do you see this happening? Like what's happening that's making this occur?
I think the 2 things contribute to it. One is the fact that players were really able to graduate with a lot of eligibility left because of COVID. That was a big contributor, and that will be over in a year. But it's just become cool to transfer, right? And if you look at the transfer portal as like a superhighway, and people get in it and start traveling down the superhighway, right now the biggest exit lanes are in Madison, Wisconsin, and Austin, Texas. And those teams Wisconsin has 4 transfers right now starting, if I'm not mistaken. And if Texas did it last year. So you're seeing it really impact every level of team. And, there've been other, single kids that have gone out, and Bree Kelly at Pitt, for example. Carter Booth is the Wisconsin kid because Wisconsin was actually taking kids from their own league, which used to be, taboo. You couldn't do that. And then you see some teams, I'll tell you another team that I think is sort of coming out of the woodwork now is Duke. They had they have not been great in the past few years. They had a really good preseason, and they have a kid named Jess Robinson who transferred from Michigan, who's really playing a big role for them. So you do see it all over the place.
All right. So you mentioned that COVID provided that extra year. So my curiosity is, and I'd love to hear your take on this, do you think this continues even though the COVID extra year is about to be finished? Is it that attractive for these young players to jump on that super highway that you used, the term you used, and jump off at another school? Do you think this is going to keep happening?
Yeah, I think you're going to see more transfers than you ever did prior to COVID. I think that coaches will now try to do more. For example, I don't think you're going to see as many people redshirt. I just don't think you will, because you don't want that redshirted kid to graduate with a year left, and then all the work you did developing them goes to somebody else. I think that's going to be an issue. I think that you're also going to see a lot of, because you're starting to see this in men's basketball now, and you'll probably see it in volleyball, where there'll be NIL deals that will get better as players, the longer they stay in a program. So they'll be rewarded for continuity. But even with those things in there, I still believe you're going to see a lot of transferring, because it's just the attitude toward transferring has changed. It used to be a last resort thing that you did, and now it's, all over the internet, and people applaud you for it.
Absolutely. And Doug, do you have any thoughts on this? I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, not a ton different. I think the dramatic movement isn't a wonderful thing for the sport, or any sport, frankly, for that matter. I don't think the coaches are, terribly comfortable with that. I think they're getting more comfortable. Maybe it's just the world we're going to live in. I think the investment by a lot more schools in their women's volleyball program contributes to this. I think there's a little more parity there. I actually go back to the coaching side. I think there's just some really good coaching going on in this country by lots of people, and I think that attracts kids to move probably a little bit, and allows for programs that historically haven't been at the top of the country to move up pretty quickly. And I agree with Tom. I think it's great. I think we, I don't know. We like there's a certain amount of exposure and positivity, I guess, that comes from a team winning lots of national championships. The UCLA model in men's basketball, and I think Penn State helped grow the women's side by winning a bunch of championships. But I think generally getting more schools that have a legitimate chance to be in the Final Four, win a conference championship, et cetera, is really good. And, just helps grow the sport to a great level. So I think what's happening in women's volleyball, in spite of the frustrations for the coaches and administrators, maybe even more, of NIL and the transfer portal is more positive than not. So the sport is just exploding.
I've been watching, and I read a number of the boards that make comments about their teams, the Wisconsin board and the Nebraska board and the Texas board and everybody, and then the ones where they talk about each other. But there seems to me, as I watch, there seems to be some pressure on coaches, whether they accept a transfer or whether they have a new young player on their team that they're worried about moving on. There seems to be sometimes some playing patterns that are being forced by the coach, worrying about, if I don't play this freshman from California, she's going to be in the transfer portal. I've got to give her some playing time. And so sometimes you see these unusual substitutions where they get some playing time and you're like, why did they do that? And I think some of this stuff is being caused by the pressure of me making sure that this player is getting what I promised her.
I agree, Bill, and certainly all of us have been in those shoes before and understand that. So, Tom, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. I agree with you about Florida. I think they're super talented, one of the best teams Mary's ever had. Not sure I agree that they're going to get to the Final Four without Stuckey. That injury is super significant to them, and their transfer kid is coming in and doing a great job. But can she hold her composure and run it at that high level? We just don't know yet, right? So talk to me about Wisconsin or Nebraska in the Big Ten. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to predict that Nebraska wins that league. I just feel like the continuity in the way, and he's got one of the best freshmen in the United States. He's got great setting, in my opinion. I feel like those things are going to really help him. Wisconsin's running a 6-2. I don't have anything against 6-2s. I think if you have the personnel to do it, but I don't think the setting is as strong on Wisconsin as it is on Nebraska.
All right. So next is, can Texas defend their Big 12 title?
Their Big 12 title, I think they can. Yes. I think I think they'll win the Big 12, and I think they may be better off because their league is tougher than it has traditionally been. And that may prepare them and help them as they move through the NCAA tournament.
Do they get to the Final Four?
I'd say yes.
Okay. All right. And last one, talk to us about Louisville. What's their pathway?
See, I have not watched any Louisville matches this year, but I've looked at what they've been doing, and they're doing great things. I love Danny, and I think that she is one of the greatest things she does is she gets kids to compete. The big question for them, and they've got Pitt in their league, and they've got Georgia Tech, who's pretty good, and Duke I think is better, but I really believe you have to be battle tested in order to make that long run in the NCAA tournament. And so how good the rest of the ACC is going to really help Louisville or Pitt, whoever ends up coming out as the top seed.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there's going to be a battle to get to the Final Four, and I think this could be one of the most competitive Final Fours, just because there's a lot of strength at the top, right?
That's right.
I don't know that there's in the middle. I don't know that there's a lot of parity. There's a lot of parity in the middle, but not a lot of those middle teams that can step up to the top 10 or 12 or 8, whatever number you want to use. So it'll be interesting to see as we get to those regional finals what happens. Those pretty exciting time.
And I think, you know, you don't discount Stanford's obviously very good, even though they've taken some losses, but he jumped into it with full on playing a really, really difficult non-conference schedule. Washington State is going to be good, in my opinion. And I think, they could be overlooked, but I think when it's all said and done, they're going to be probably second in the Pac-12. They're going to have a good seed, and they'll have a chance to have a season like they've never had.
So, Fran, can I jump in here with one last thing and shift gears just a second? That's great stuff, but I'm going to go to Tom first and then Doug. So let's talk about the Pac-12 disintegrating. Let's talk about Washington State and Oregon State being left. What's their best option? And you've been in the Mountain West. Would it be to their advantage and Mountain West's advantage to merge into a Pac-12, because they've got 2 years of NC2A money coming, and they've got places that they can place their teams for football championships and basketball money. What's the downside of that, or the upside of that, as a former Mountain West guy and playing against Pac-12?
Well, the upside for the teams in the Mountain West who have been traditionally in it for a long time, I think, is to pull in 2 really quality teams to expand that conference. And, when they added Boise State a few years back, it was really good for the league. They were losing, though, BYU and Utah at that point. And so I do think merging with them makes sense to me. But, what I don't know is, what are these media packages going to be worth? And, are they still trying to get their way into the ACC or whatever? It's really difficult to tell. And I think, one of the things that people don't think about is how difficult, for a football team to be from Los Angeles and play Rutgers, it's not a big deal. For a volleyball team to travel across the country and play Rutgers and Maryland on a Thursday, Saturday, or whatever, that's a difficult thing, and it's an expensive thing. And I think that, I just tend to feel like we haven't seen everything that's going to happen yet. And, nobody talks about this, but they could take sports and move them into other leagues or into other divisions and that kind of thing. And so, but I do think, going back to your original question about the Pac-12, I do think that it makes sense for Washington State and Oregon State to merge with at least some of the Mountain West teams and try to create a league that is really basically in the western part of the United States that has good quality football and other sports.
Doug, this morning D1 Ticker showed the television viewing of Oregon State versus Washington State, and it was much higher than UCLA versus Utah. People said there's not much brand power by those last 2 teams in the Pac-12, but that didn't seem to be the case this weekend, because they had a higher television ranking, and they have had higher television rankings in their first 3 or 4 matches. So what's your take on all this?
Yeah, boy, it's a couple of things that Tom said I really agree with. I think we're not done seeing the turmoil settle. I think there's going to be more changes. Some I'm fearful about, and some is just settling out. I think it's Hey, money talks, sadly, in this environment, and um, you know the big conference channel deals have driven, I think, the majority of the moves that we've seen. I think it's terribly sad that the Pac-12 is essentially gone. That's disappointing to me. Um, I think the leadership of conferences has risen to a really maybe the key position in today's world, today's collegiate athletic world. Um, I absolutely agree with Tom that the student athlete term is becoming more problematic. How difficult it is to go cross country for a lot of the sports. I agree with him. It's not a big deal for football. It's a big deal for almost everybody else. And it seems to me, notwithstanding your comment about the most recent TV ratings, that East Coast time zone is a huge advantage right now, for sure in football. And I think that had a lot to do with the sort of the demise of the Pac-12. So I don't know. I guess I'm a huge fan of broad-based opportunity in our educational system, the NCAA world, and I'm a little fearful about the future of that. Hopefully, wrongly. I hope I'm not right, but I think as the finances dominate, we're putting athletic directors, school presidents, et cetera, in a increasingly challenging position, and that concerns me. So hopefully that won't be the case, but we'll see.
Bob, I think you should thank these guys for being the best two we've ever had at answering our questions directly, and
Directly, there you go.
we really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
because
Tom,
we're retired.
Doug, thank you very,
Thanks for
very
having me
much.
on.
Hey, it's a pleasure. You guys take care. I think you do a great job. It's fun to be on. So thanks.
Well, we
Tom,
appreciate
great to
it.
talk to you too. It's
Yeah,
been fun.
thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
All right. You bet.
Thanks
Great
to
job,
both
you
of
guys.
y'all.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Okay, I think we need to spend a minute and just address a question that came in last week during the show that we didn't get a chance to answer. And that was, the concern that a viewer had, I believe from Puerto Rico, on the effects that the PVF is already having and may continue to have on the Puerto Rican League. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Well, my understanding is that they've already made the decision to move their league to the fall so that it won't destroy their spring. But I'm not sure. That's rumor. I got that from another PFV coach, and that coach told me that Puerto Rico has already made the move, realizing that their players will be in demand for these new pro teams. So they're going to play their league in the fall, similar to, and I never get this right, Bill, Athletes in Action or Elite Athletes United.
Athletes
Is that
Unlimited.
right? United Athletes.
Unlimited.
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 All right.
Athletes Unlimited.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
fans
thing
always
is-
got to correct us on this.
Yeah,
Like,
I never
we're-
can get that right. And that's an event that just drives me nuts. So I guess it's okay that I misspeak.
Well, it's not.
there.
I don't think it's really a professional league as much as it is an event. I mean, it's a professional event for volleyball.
But the Puerto Rican League is a professional league that's been going on for 20, 30, 40 years, and it's has some very good players in it, and it's had a good purpose. Moving to the fall might be a great opportunity for those players playing in that league, because then they've got 2 seasons to play and 2 paychecks.
Well, and the reason that the Puerto Rican question came in was, I can only speak to 2 facts. One is, originally, back when the league first formed, Puerto Rican players from Puerto Rico were going to count as foreign players, which means you can only have 2 foreign players per team. And then partway through the formation of the PVF, they switched and they said that Puerto Rican players no longer count as foreign players. They count as domestic players. And that's where some fear from the Puerto Rican League comes in, because there's no limit to the number of Puerto Rican players that can play in the PVF.
Yeah, and you could even draft a player mid-season to fill in for an injury or something and really mess up their league, especially if it's one of the primary players on one of their teams. So I think the move to the fall is a smart move. And I think it's better for their players, and they have a great advantage.
Now, Fran, have you heard that also, that they're moving to the fall?
I did hear that. I have not seen it officially anywhere, but I heard that was going to happen. And I don't know how soon that's going to happen. I don't know when they're implementing it. So I've heard the rumor, and I think that's, as I agree with Mick, I think it's the smart thing to do. Pro Volleyball Federation stays in the spring, which presumably it will, then that gives them, and it gives the Pro Volleyball Federation coaches a chance to kind of vet those players and draw from that league. And those players get two paychecks, two opportunities, and I think volleyball gets better from it. So I would agree with Mick.
Okay, the last thing, last order of business for our show today is to talk a little bit about the Master Coaches College Transfer Showcase. That's going to be held at the AVCA convention Saturday, December 16th. And we have confirmed the headquarters hotel. Well, and we were able to get a great rate for our athletes. It's a 145 at the Barrymore Hotel in Tampa, one of the finest hotels down in that Riverwalk area. And I think our athletes are going to really enjoy being down there. But this is free for all coaches that have registered for the AVCA convention. And registration is now open for all athletes. And we're going to give them 100% refund if they decide not to transfer, if they register now, up to 1 month before we actually run the event. After that, we hope they're going to be there. So until next week, I'd like to thank every one of our viewers and our listeners for being with us again. I thought it was a great show, having both Tom and Doug here with us, answering our questions directly about the international game and the collegiate game. And I hope you all felt like that you learned something from today's podcast. Thank you.